Have you ever had this quiet fear in spiritual practice? What if I wake up and lose myself? What if self-inquiry goes too far? What if the person I know as me disappears and I become cold, blank, detached, or somehow less human? This is not a silly question. In fact, I think it is one of the most honest questions a spiritual seeker can ask. Because many teachings say things like, you are not the ego, you are not the mind, you are not the person, or the separate self is an illusion. And if we hear those words too mentally, it can sound almost threatening. It can sound as if awakening means psychological death. It can sound as if the person you have been all your life will be erased. Your humor, your warmth, your preferences, your relationships, your natural way of speaking, your love for your family, your creativity, your ordinary human character, gone. And then the mind naturally says, wait a minute, do I really want that? So in this video, I want to answer this question honestly, not as someone claiming to be awakened. I am not speaking to you from some final state, and I do not want to pretend that I am. I am speaking as someone who practices self-inquiry, studies these teachings, reflects on them deeply, and tries to apply them in ordinary life. So this is not going to be a dramatic, enlightened person answer. It is going to be a careful, practical answer. So, can awakening really make you lose your personality? The honest answer is this: you probably do not lose your functional personality, but you may lose some of the false pressure, defensiveness, and psychological heaviness that you used to mistake for yourself. And that can feel frightening at first, because many things we call my personality are actually mixed together. Some of them are natural, some of them are conditioned, some of them are harmless preferences, some of them are defense mechanisms, some of them are old wounds trying to protect themselves, some of them are habits of fear, pride, shame, comparison, or control. And spiritual practice, especially self-inquiry, can begin to loosen the grip of those patterns. That does not mean you become nobody in a negative sense. It means you may begin to see that what you called me was not one solid thing. It was a bundle of thoughts, memories, habits, reactions, preferences, roles, fears, and desires, all appearing around a deeper sense of being. This is why the question becomes subtle. Because when a teaching says the ego dissolves, the mind imagines total disappearance. But in daily life, what usually happens, at least from what we can observe in mature practitioners and traditional teachings, is more nuanced. The compulsive self-image may weaken. The need to defend every opinion may soften. The pressure to be seen in a certain way may lose some power. The emotional reactions may still arise, but they may not define you as completely. You may still have a body, a voice, a name, a history, relationships, responsibilities, and preferences. But the inner ownership of all of that may become lighter. You may still prefer tea over coffee. You may still enjoy certain music. You may still have a particular sense of humor. You may still speak in your own way. You may still be quiet, energetic, serious, playful, introverted, expressive, practical, artistic, or analytical. But the feeling of, this is what I must protect at all costs because this is absolutely me, may begin to relax. So let me say it clearly, even this early in the video. Waking up does not erase your personality. It loosens the belief that your personality is all that you are. Keep that distinction in mind as we go deeper. That is a very different thing from becoming empty in a lifeless way. In fact, the fear of losing personality often comes from confusing personality with identity. Personality is how life expresses itself through this body-mind. Identity is the belief that this expression is the whole of what you are. Those are not exactly the same thing. A simple example: someone may be naturally quiet. That quietness may remain, but before practice, the person may think, "I am quiet because I am socially inferior, awkward, uninteresting, or afraid." After deeper understanding, quietness may simply be quietness. No story attached, no shame attached, no need to become someone else. Another person may be naturally humorous. Before practice, humor may be used to seek approval or avoid vulnerability. Later, humor may still be there, but it may feel freer, cleaner, less desperate. So the outer personality may not vanish, but the psychological burden behind it may change. This is one reason why awakening is not the same as becoming a spiritual stereotype. Some people imagine that if they wake up, they must become slow, soft-spoken, expressionless, and permanently peaceful in a very particular way. But that may just be another image created by the mind, a spiritual costume, a new personality called the awakened person. And honestly, that can become another trap. Ramana Maharshi's self-inquiry does not ask us to create a holy personality. It does not ask us to act like someone who has no preferences. It does not ask us to pretend we are beyond ordinary life. The question is much more direct. Who is the one who says, "My personality"? Who is afraid of losing it? What is aware of the personality? Can the thoughts, moods, roles, and reactions be noticed? And if they can be noticed, are they the deepest truth of what you are? This is where self-inquiry becomes practical, not theoretical. When the fear appears, "What if I lose myself?" we do not need to immediately answer it with philosophy. We can pause and notice the fear directly. There is fear in the body. There may be tightness in the chest or stomach. There may be thoughts saying, "I will disappear. I will become nobody. I will lose control." Or, "I will not love my family anymore." Instead of arguing with those thoughts, self-inquiry gently asks, to whom does this fear appear? Who is afraid of disappearing? What is the I that feels threatened? Not as an intellectual puzzle, not as a mantra repeated mechanically, but as a way of turning attention back toward the sense of me that feels at risk. And often, what we find is interesting. The fear itself is appearing in awareness. The thought about losing personality is appearing in awareness. The image of becoming blank or detached is appearing in awareness. Even the feeling, "I am scared," is known. So before we decide whether awakening will destroy us, we can notice that the fear of destruction is itself an object of awareness. It comes and goes. It changes. It has intensity, then it fades, but the knowing of it is already here. This is exactly why Ramana Maharshi called the ego a phantom I thought. It appears, it is known, and it subsides in the same awareness that you already are. This does not mean we suppress the fear. It does not mean we dismiss it with spiritual language. Actually, I think we should respect it, because sometimes this fear is not just ego resisting truth. Sometimes it is the nervous system asking for safety. Sometimes it is old trauma. Sometimes it is a sign that we are pushing practice too hard. Sometimes it is simply the mind misunderstanding the teaching. So the answer is not ignore the fear, destroy the ego, and keep going. That can be unwise. A healthier answer is slow down, ground yourself, and inquire gently. Self-inquiry should not become violence against the personality. It should not become hatred of the human being. It should not become an attempt to erase your emotional life. That is not freedom. That is another form of inner conflict. A mature spiritual path does not make you less human. It makes you less trapped by unconscious patterns. At least that is the direction. You still live. You still respond. You still care. You still may make mistakes. You still may have habits that need attention. But there is gradually more space around them. And this space is important, because without space, personality feels like prison. With space, personality becomes expression. Before practice, anger may feel like, I am angry and I must act from it. With more awareness, anger may be noticed as a movement in the body and mind. It may still need to be expressed or addressed, but it does not have to possess you completely. Before practice, sadness may feel like, my life is hopeless. With more awareness, sadness may still be felt deeply, but it may not become your entire identity. Before practice, success may feel like, now I am somebody, and failure may feel like, now I am nothing. With more awareness, success and failure still matter on the practical level, but they may not define your being in the same absolute way. This is the real shift, not becoming a blank person, not losing all character, not floating above life, but no longer being completely hypnotized by the story of me. Now, there is another fear people sometimes have. They worry, if I wake up, will I stop caring about my family, my work, my creativity, or my goals? This fear is understandable, because if spiritual teachings are presented badly, detachment can sound like indifference. But true detachment does not mean coldness. It means less clinging. There is a huge difference. Clinging says, I need you to behave a certain way so I can feel complete. Love says, I care about you. Clinging says, my work must prove my worth. Healthy action says, this work matters, so I will do it well. Clinging says, I must control life. Wisdom says, I will respond as clearly as I can. So if awakening removes something, maybe it is not love. Maybe it removes some of the fear mixed into love. Maybe it removes some of the control mixed into care. Maybe it removes some of the vanity mixed into creativity. Maybe it removes some of the insecurity mixed into ambition. Again, I am not saying this as someone who has completed that process. I am saying this as a way of understanding the direction of the teachings. The point is not to become less alive. The point is to stop being driven so blindly by fear, lack, and false identity. Think of a small child. A child has personality before they have a complex spiritual ego. They laugh in a certain way. They move in a certain way. They like certain things. They have a natural flavor. But they do not yet have the same heavy self-image adults carry. Later, life adds layers: comparison, defensiveness, shame, trying to impress, trying to hide, trying to be special, trying not to be rejected, trying to become somebody. Spiritual practice does not need to kill the natural flavor. It may simply expose the added layers, the artificial tension, the constant self-concern, the exhausting need to maintain an image. So maybe awakening is not the destruction of personality. Maybe it is the purification of identity. The personality may continue, but it is no longer believed to be the ultimate self. There is a traditional image that may help. The mind and personality are like waves on the ocean. Each wave has a shape. One wave is tall, another is gentle, another is fast, another is quiet. The wave shape is not meaningless. It exists, it appears, it has movement. But the wave is not separate from the ocean. If the wave realizes it is water, does the wave shape instantly vanish? Not necessarily. The wave may still move, but the belief, I am only this separate wave, and I must defend myself against the ocean, begins to lose its power. In the same way, personality may continue as a wave of expression, but the deeper identity shifts from the wave to the water. Of course, this is only a metaphor, and metaphors can only go so far, but it helps soften the fear, because the fear says, I will become nothing. The deeper possibility is, I may discover that I was never only this limited self-image. There is another important point. Sometimes what people call losing personality in spiritual practice is not awakening. It can be dissociation. It can be emotional shutdown. It can be spiritual bypassing. It can be pretending not to care because caring feels vulnerable. It can be using teachings like, I am not the body, or nothing is real, to avoid pain, relationships, responsibility, or healing. That is not the same thing as freedom. So we have to be honest. If practice makes someone numb, disconnected, unable to function, indifferent to loved ones, or detached in a cold and unhealthy way, that may not be awakening. That may be imbalance. It may be a sign to ground the practice, slow down, talk to someone wise, or seek professional support if needed. A clear path should make us more present, not less present, more honest, not more artificial, more compassionate, not more emotionally dead, more real, not more spaced out. This is especially important with self-inquiry, because self-inquiry can be misunderstood as rejecting everything human. A thought appears, not me. A feeling appears, not me. A relationship appears, not me. The body appears, not me. And if this is done harshly, the practice can become dry and dissociative. But Ramana's inquiry is not meant to create aversion to experience. It is meant to turn attention toward the source of the I. The world does not have to be hated. The body does not have to be hated. The personality does not have to be hated. The question is simply, what is the real I? What is aware of all this? What remains when attention is not completely lost in thought? That is a much gentler and deeper approach. So when you notice your personality, you do not need to attack it. You can simply observe. Here is a preference. Here is a reaction. Here is a familiar self-image. Here is the need to be right. Here is the fear of being ignored. Here is the wish to be admired. Here is the old habit of withdrawing. Here is the old habit of pleasing people. You do not need to say, this must be destroyed. You can ask, to whom does this appear? And then rest, even for a moment, as the aware presence in which this pattern is known. That small shift is already meaningful, not dramatic, not cinematic, but real. Another way to say it is this: awakening does not erase your humanity. It reveals that your humanity is not your prison. You can have a personality without being limited to personality, and a life story without being trapped inside that story every second. And this is why the fear of losing personality may actually be a doorway, because the fear shows how deeply we are identified with the image of ourselves. We do not only fear losing bad habits, we fear losing the familiar sense of me. Even when that me suffers, even when it feels heavy, even when it creates conflict. It is familiar, and the familiar feels safe, even when it is painful. So the mind may prefer a suffering identity over the unknown freedom beyond identity. That is very human. No need to judge it. Just notice it. When the fear says, "But who will I be without my personality?" we can answer gently, maybe you do not need to become a different person. Maybe you only need to see that the person is appearing in something deeper. Maybe life can still function through this body and mind. Maybe love can still happen. Maybe work can still happen. Maybe creativity can still happen. Maybe laughter can still happen, but with less inner contraction, less pretending, less fear, less constant self-protection. And perhaps that is not a loss. Perhaps that is a relief. There is also something very practical here. Most of us do not need to worry about instantly losing the whole ego. For most practitioners, the more realistic issue is not, what if I wake up tomorrow and vanish? The more realistic issue is, can I be a little less identified with this thought right now? Can I be a little less possessed by this emotion? Can I notice the I sense for a few seconds? Can I pause before reacting? Can I see that this self-image is not the whole truth? Can I rest as awareness for one moment in ordinary life? That is enough. We do not need to dramatize awakening. We can practice honestly, one moment at a time. And if fear appears, that too becomes part of the practice, not an obstacle outside the path. Part of the path. The fear of losing yourself can be met with awareness. The need to protect your personality can be met with awareness. The thought, I am not ready, can be met with awareness. The wish to awaken can be met with awareness. The doubt about awakening can be met with awareness. Everything becomes material for inquiry. So, can you lose your personality if you wake up? My honest answer is this. You may lose the belief that your personality is what you ultimately are. You may lose some false layers that once felt necessary. You may lose certain defensive habits. You may lose some obsession with your image. You may lose the need to constantly maintain a psychological me. But you do not need to lose your natural human warmth, humor, intelligence, preferences, or capacity to love. Those may actually become more natural when they are less burdened by fear. The personality may continue, but it is no longer the master. It becomes an instrument, a way life expresses itself, not the final truth of what you are. And for me, that makes the whole question less frightening, because the path is not asking us to become cold, blank, or inhuman. It is inviting us to discover what is already aware before the personality appears, during the personality's activity, and after each thought passes. That awareness is not against the person. It simply is not limited to the person. So maybe the real fear is not that we will lose our personality. Maybe the fear is that we will lose the illusion of being only that personality. And that loss, if it happens naturally and maturely, may not be a tragedy. It may be freedom. So do not force yourself to become nobody. Do not imitate an awakened person. Do not suppress your ordinary human qualities. Just notice what is here. Notice the personality. Notice the one who claims it. Notice the fear of losing it. And gently ask, who am I, before I hold on to any image of myself? Stay with that, softly. Not as a performance, not as a belief, as a living inquiry. Because in the end, you do not wake up from your humanity. You wake up out of the illusion that you are only this personality. And if this question touched something in you, if practice sometimes brings up fear, resistance, or deep discomfort, then watch the video called Self-Inquiry and Fear: What to Do When Practice Brings Up Deep Discomfort. It goes deeper into how to meet fear directly during inquiry, without forcing and without running away. I'll leave the link to that video in the description so you can continue from there.